Can you hear me? Can you hear me over the roar of all the machinery that's going on in this parking lot of Ross and Marshall's in a part of Sacramento we seldom come to? Anyway, Constance needs to shop today, or I guess we need to shop today. And I'm sitting in the car. It's going to be 101 right now. I think it's 90 something. And I've got the car all opened up, and I don't know whether you can hear me over the roar of this construction that's going on. I wish you could smell this asphalt. But anyway, here I'm going to set us up. And I'm going to plow through with the little next section from Kongsampox or the Wake World. So I'm going to get kind of way up into the microphone this morning. And we're at the part 2 of the Wake World, which will be starting from the, let's see, where I'm pointing there, the Green Palace of Netzach. So we've come up, we've brought Lola up through 10, 9, 8 to 7. And now we're getting into a very important place. As a matter of fact, another little abyss has to be crossed at this section here. This is the portal between all of this down here and what will be the more specific headquarters of the Holy Guardian Angel, number 6. So we're moving from 7 to 6, but remember all the paths have to come up their novelty flavor straw way. So with that introduction, let's see if I may even want to put the phone in another position, but anyway. Part 2, I was telling you how we started from the Green Palace, that's Netzach, number 7. There are 3 passages that lead to the treasure house of gold, and all of them are very dreadful. Okay, so the treasure house of gold is number 6, right there in the middle, number 6, and there's 3 paths that lead to it. Can you see? There's one that goes from 8 to 6, or excuse me, from 9 to 6, from 8 to 6, and from 7 to 6. And we're going to be describing those paths that Lola has to go through. One of them is called the Terror by Night, and another the Arrow by Day. And the third has a name that people are afraid to hear, so I won't say. And the marginal note says, Via Oyen. And Oyen is what we're going to talk about. Oyen is the one that's leading from 8 to 6. Oyen is the devil card. But in the first we came to a mighty throne of gray granite, shaped like the sweetest pussycat you ever saw, and set up on a desolate heath. It was midnight, and the devil came down and sat in the midst. But my fairy prince whispered, "Hush, it's a great secret. But his name is Yeshua, and he is the Savior of the world." And that was very funny, because the girl next to me thought it was Jesus Christ, until another fairy prince my prince's brother, whispered as he kissed her, "Hush, tell nobody ever. That is Satan, and he is the savior of the world." We were a very great company, and I can't tell you all the strange things we did and said, or the song we sang as we danced facing outwards in a great circle, ever closing on the devil on the throne. But whenever I saw a toad or a bat or a horrid insect, my fairy prince always whispered, "It is the savior of the world." And I saw that it was so. We did all the most beautiful, wicked things you can imagine, and yet all the time we knew they were good and right and must be done if we were ever going to get to the house of gold. So we enjoyed ourselves very much and ate the most extraordinary supper you can think of. There were babies roasted whole and stuffed with pork, sausages, and olives. And some of the girls cut off chops and steaks from their own bodies and gave them to a beautiful white cook at the silver grill that was lighted with the gas of dead bodies and marshes. And he cooked them splendidly, and we all enjoyed it immensely. There was a tame goat with a gold collar that went about laughing with everyone, and he was all shaved in patches like a poodle. We kissed him and petted him, and it was lovely. You must remember that I never let go of my fairy prince for a single instant, or of course I should have been turned into a horrid black toad. Then there was another passage called The Arrow by Day. Now, going from going from 9 directly up to 6 is Sagittarius there. Samak. That's the arrow pointing straight upwards. And then there was another passage called The Arrow by Day. And there was a most lovely lady, all shining with the sun and moon and stars, who was lighting a great bowl of water in one hand and dripping dew out of a cup. I'll wait for this truck to pass. Don't make any noise there. Knock it off. I digress. I'm going to start that again. There was another passage called The Arrow by Day, and there was the most lovely lady, all shining with the sun and moon and stars, who was lighting a great bowl of water with one hand and dropping dew out of a cup, and with the other she was putting out a terrible fire with a torch. She had a red lion and a white eagle that she had always had since she was a little girl. She had found them in a nasty pit full of all kinds of filth, and they were very savage. But by always treating them kindly, they had grown up faithful and good. This should be a lesson to all of us never to be unkind to our pets. Now, alchemists among us will recognize this as the coagula part of the formula Solve et Coagula. This is the temperance card in the tarot, and one of the final stages in the alchemical experiment, if you will. This is the one where the Orphic egg finally gets incubated. But anyway, that's another story. I digress. My fairy prince was laughing all the time in the third path and the third path is Nun. The third path goes from 8 to 6. My fairy prince was laughing all the time in the third path. There was nobody there but an old gentleman who had put his bones on outside and was trying ever so hard to cut down the grass with a scythe. But the faster he cut it, the faster it grew. And yet only one ever got to the end of it. But I saw a lot of people walking straight through as if they knew it quite well. He explained, though, that they were really only one. And if you walk through, that proved it. I thought that was silly, but he's much older and wiser than I am, so I said nothing. The truth is that it is a very difficult palace to talk about, and the further you get in, the harder it is to say what you mean, because it all has to be put into dream talk. As of course the language of the wake world is silence. So never mind, let me get on. We came by and by to the 6th house, Tifereth, the sphere of the sun. I forgot to say that all these 3 paths were really one, because they all meant that things were different inside to outside, so people couldn't judge. It is fearfully interesting, but mind you, don't go into those passages without the fairy prince. And of course there's a veil. That's that little abyss thing that I was talking about. The veil of Paraquat, I call it. But it's spelled Pe Resh Kuf Tav. Paraquat. The veil. It's a practice of this. Okay. I don't think I better tell you about the veil. I'll only put your mouth to my head and your hand there. That'll tell anybody who knows that I've really been there and that it's all true that I'm telling you. Okay, he's making reference to the position that 2 Adeptus minors or people in the Golden Dawn who've reached that 6th plane or the portal to it, who have gone through the same ceremony recognize themselves. It's like a Masonic sign of recognition. Before you whisper a word, the secret word, you got to put your foot someplace, and you got to put your knee someplace, and you got to grasp your hand someplace, and stuff like that. Okay. Secret stuff. The 6th house is called the Treasure House of Gold, and the marginal note says the ceremony of 5 equals 6. The neophyte ceremony and this ceremony are the first 2 major landmark rituals or initiations of the Golden Dawn. It's a most mysterious place as ever you were in. First, there's a tiny, tiny, tiny doorway you must crawl through on your hands and knees. And even then, I scraped ever such a lot of skin off my back. And then you have to be nailed on a red board with 4 arms with a great gold circle in the middle. And it hurts you dreadfully. Then they make you swear the most solemn things you ever heard of. How you would be faithful to the fairy prince and live for nothing but to know him better and better, so that the nails stopped hurting. Because of course I saw that I was really being married, and this was part of it. And I was glad as glad. And at that moment my fairy prince put his hand on my head, and I tell you, honor bright, it was more wake up than ever before, than even when he used to kiss me. And after that, they said I would go into the bride chamber. But it was only the most curious room that ever was, with 7 sides. Golden Dawn people will recognize the vault of the Adams. And what's in there? Lola tells us. There was a dreadful red dragon on the floor, and all the sides were painted every color you can think of, with curious figures and pictures. The light was not dream light at all, it was wake light. And it came through a beautiful rose in the ceiling. In the middle was a table, all covered with beautiful pictures and texts, and there were ever such strange things on it. There's the little crucifix in the middle, all of diamonds and emeralds and rubies, and other precious stones. And there was a dagger with a golden handle, and a cup full of the most delicious wine, and there was a curious coin with the strangest writing on it, and a funny little stick that was covered with flames, like a rose tree is with roses. Besides the strange coin was a heavy iron chain, and I took it, put it around my neck, because I was bound to my fairy prince. And I would never go about like other people till I found him again. And they took the dagger and dipped it in the cup and stabbed me all over to show that I was not afraid to be hurt. If only I could find my fairy prince. I then took the crucifix and held it up to make more light in case he was somewhere in the dark corners, but no. Yet I knew he was there somewhere, so I thought he must be in the box. For under the table was a great chest, and I was terribly sad because I felt something dreadful was going to happen. And the marginal note makes reference to the pastos of our Father, the tomb, the coffin of our Father. And sure enough, when I had the courage, I asked them to open the box, and the same people that made me crawl through that horrid hole and lost my fairy prince and nailed me to the red board took away the table, opened the box, and there was my fairy prince. Quite dead. If you only knew how sorry I felt. But I had with me a walking stick with wings and a shining sun at the top that had been his, Caduceus. And I touched him on the breast to try to wake him, but it was no good. I only seemed to hear his voice saying wonderful things. And it was quite certain he wasn't really dead. So I put the walking stick on his breast, and another little thing he had with it I had forgotten to tell you about. It's an ankh. It was a kind of cross with an oval handle that he'd been very fond of. But I couldn't go away without something of his, so I took a shepherd's staff and a little whip with blood on it, and jewels oozing from the blood, if you know what I mean, that they had put into his hands when they buried him. Then I went away and cried and cried and cried, but before I got very far, they called me back. And the people who had been so stern were smiling. And I saw that they had taken the coffin out of the little room with the 7 sides, and the coffin was quite empty. Then they began to tell us all about it, and I heard my fairy prince within the little room saying holy, exalted things, such as the stars trace in the sky as they travel in a car called Millions of Years. Then they took me into the little room, and there was my fairy prince standing in the middle. So I knelt down, and we all kissed his beautiful feet, and the myriads of eyes like diamonds that were hidden in his feet laughed joy at us. One couldn't lift one's head, for he was too glorious to behold. But he spoke wonderful words like dying nightingales that have sorrowed for the fading of the roses, and pressed themselves to death on the thorns. And one's whole body became a single eye. Then was light, as the lightning flaming out of the east even into the west, and it was fashioned as the swiftness of a sword. And one by one rose up, then one seemed to be quite dead and buried in the center of the pyramid of the most brilliant light that it was possible to think of. And it was wake light too. And everybody knows that even wake darkness is really brighter than dream light. So you must guess what it was like. There was more than that too. I can't possibly tell you. I know too what INRI on the ring meant. I can't tell you that either, because the dream language has such a lot of important words missing. It's a very silly language, I think. By and by, I came to myself a little, and now I was really and truly married to my fairy prince. So I suppose we will always be near each other now. There was the way out of the little room with millions of changing colors, ever so beautiful, and it was lined with armed men, waving their swords for joy like flashes of lightning. And all above us, glittering serpents danced and sang for joy. There was a winged horse ready for us when we came out on the slopes of the mountain. You see, the 6th house is really a mountain called Mount Abiegnius. Only one doesn't see it because one goes through indoors all the way. There's one house you have to go outdoors to get to, because no passage has ever been made. But I'll tell you about that afterwards. It's the 3rd house. So, we got on the horse and went away for our honeymoon. I shan't tell you a single word about the honeymoon. And that's the end of part 2. Of the wake world. Tomorrow, hopefully from the quieter venue, we'll take part 3. And it'll just keep getting better. Okay, until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.